Good evening, councillors and members of the public. I'm Jason Brock, the chair of the policy committee, leader of the council, welcoming you all again to the policy committee, which is being held as an online meeting. I'll ask all of the members of the committee to introduce themselves for the benefit of the public, and so that we can check that everybody is in attendance as expected. As ever, people may lose internet connection during the meeting, but as long as we have 3 members still here, we will be quorate. Could I remind members and officers to put their microphones on mute when you're not speaking? When called to speak, unmute your microphone, pause briefly to allow for the slight time delay in connection before speaking. You must also remember to put your camera on before being called to speak, otherwise you will not be visible on the screen during your contribution. As with previous meetings, I will ask members individually at the end of a debate on each report to state whether they are for, against, or wish to abstain from the recommendation before them. Exception to that, reports which are just for noting, where we can seek general assent. So I'll now do a roll call of councillors, and if everybody can put their cameras on in preparation for that, introduce yourself and tell us any position you hold. So as I've already said, I'm Jason Brock, chair of the policy committee, leader of the council. And now going for everybody else alphabetically, Councillor Davies.
Hi, Ricky Devine, Tilehurst councillor.
Councillor Emberson.
Hi, Councillor Ellie Emberson, Minster Ward councillor and lead member for Corporate and Consumer Services.
Councillor Ennis.
Hi, Councillor John Ennis, councillor for Southcote and also lead councillor for Housing.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Good evening. Councillor Tony Jones, Redlands councillor and lead member for Adult Social Care.
Thank you. Councillor Page had sent me a message to say he was struggling to get into the meeting. Are you here, Councillor Page? No, we'll move on. Chris Brooks, you appear to be sharing your screen or have taken control of the screen, which is causing all sorts of confusion. Councillor Skeets, I think, is having trouble getting into the meeting as well, but hopefully will be joining us later. Councillor Stevens.
Councillor Stevens is here. Good evening. Councillor David Stevens, Thames Ward and Chairman of the Ward Governance Committee.
Councillor Terry.
Councillor Liz Terry, councillor for Minster Ward and lead member for Children's Services.
And finally, Councillor White.
Evening, everyone. Councillor Rob White, Park Ward councillor and leader of the Green Group of Councillors.
And Councillor White. So to just remind all councillors then, if you wish to indicate to speak on a particular item, please indicate in the chat when we're at that particular item, unless you've notified me already in advance of the meeting that you wish to speak. So I should also introduce the officers who are in attendance tonight. So Peter Sloman is the council's chief executive. Jackie Yates is our executive director of resources and the chief financial officer. Francis Martin is the executive director of economic growth and neighbourhood services. Mike Graham is the assistant director of legal and democratic services, as well as the monitoring officer. Peter Robinson is the interim assistant director of finance. Kate Grafer is the assistant director of procurement and contracts. And Chris Brooks is the electoral registration officer and returning officer. Takes us on to item 2 then, declarations of interest. I've had one notification from Councillor Ennis. Councillor Ennis, do you wish to declare?
I do. I wish to declare a personal interest. I think it's item 4. Brighter Futures, that I am the chair of Reading YOS, which is the Youth Offending Service. I'm the chair of the Reading Youth Offending Service.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. That's item 11 rather than 4, but yes, that's fine. Thank you and noted. Any other declarations of interest? I've not been notified of any. Fantastic. That moves us on then to minutes, the minutes of the previous meeting. Any comment on these? Good. Are we okay to agree those as a correct record then?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Taking us on to item 4, petitions and questions. No petitions this month. No public questions either, but we do have 4 councillor questions. The first of which is from Councillor White to myself. Over to you, Councillor White.
Thank you, Councillor Brock. This one is on the US-UK trade deal. I have been contacted by local campaigning group Global Justice Now on the US-UK trade deal. Negotiations for a US-UK trade deal are currently taking place every month. The US-UK trade deal is a high-risk deal, posing multiple risks to the economy, society, and the environment. Such risks include the possible introduction of chlorinated chicken, extending privatisation in the NHS, and blocking action on climate change. Do you share these concerns? And if so, will you write to the local MPs and the Secretary of State for International Trade raising these concerns?
Thank you for the question, Councillor White. Naturally, I share these concerns, and I'd imagine almost everyone would, and I'm very happy to write to our MPs and indeed to the Secretary of State. One might hope that the imminent elevation of Joe Biden to the US presidency will be a positive change in respect of this issue, and I note positively his undertaking to bring the USA back into the international community in a meaningful manner, quite especially by restoring the commitments of the Paris Agreement. Councillor White, did you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you, Councillor Brock. And just to let you know that Councillor Williams isn't able to ask his question. He's asked me to ask it on his behalf for the next one.
Ah, well then, over to you, Councillor White, to ask the question on behalf of Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much. This one is on rogue algorithms. The government recently dropped its rogue algorithm that caused such misery over exam grades because it was unreliable and wrong. It was arbitrary, made mistakes, and had a huge effect on people's lives. Residents are worried that other algorithms are in use in local government too. Can the lead councillor please tell me what algorithms are automated, what algorithms and automated decision-making programs the council uses, and how reliable and accurate the results from them are?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Williams, and thank you, Councillor White, for asking it on his behalf. You'll be pleased to hear that the kind of algorithm in use for exam grades last summer is not in place at the council. However, as you might expect, there are some computerised tools in use for assisting officers with decisions, but these do not automatically make decisions about residents and services. They only aid officers in their work. For instance, in the Revenues and Benefits team, there is a package which is classified as risk-based verification software. Indeed, Councillor Williams would have seen all of the details of this at the Audit and Governance Committee he attended on the 30th of January 2020. This application assigns a risk group to applicants for housing benefit and council tax support. The software determines how much verification is required for each application, so that those applications considered routine are asked to provide less verification and evidence of their claims, and those considered higher risk are asked to provide more verification and evidence. The decisions on each case are made by officers after receiving the evidence, and there is no automated decision making on those cases. A pilot project using robotic process automation is also being developed. This is not an algorithm, as has been envisaged in the question, but it would automate the staff starting and leaving process by taking information from one system and automatically transferring it to other systems. The best description of this would be automated cutting and pasting. The council is likely to be looking at the use of analytics to support decision making in the future, but any such moves would be subject to business cases which would both assess the relevant risks and would be visible to councillors. Councillor White, did you have a supplementary?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor White, and pass my regards to Councillor Williams. On to Councillor question 3, which is Councillor Mankani to ask the lead councillor for corporate and consumer services. Councillor Mankani, you're currently muted.
Okay, let's try again. Now
There
can
we
you
go.
hear me?
There we go.
Thank you. My question is the concerns of the use of fireworks and the anxiety and stress that can be caused to pets, the elderly, the vulnerable and environment. The increase in the use and acceptance of fireworks being used to celebrate events throughout the year has clearly led to an increase in complaints and concerns from the residents. For many, a firework display is an enjoyable experience. However, it has had its downsides in that noisy explosions, bright flashes of lights can also have a very frightening effect on some people and household pets. There is also the health and safety aspect from the present dangers to members of the public when handling what is effectively explosive materials. Whilst many events throughout the year are well publicised, such as Guy Fawkes, New Year's Eve, Chinese New Year, Diwali and Eid, dates where precautions are taken to ensure pets are kept safe indoors. There are other incidents where fireworks are not being used being used. Therefore, will the council reassure the residents of Reading that all steps and precautions are taken, including education of the dangers of fireworks, especially in schools and colleges, that those who are looking to hold a private display are made mindful of neighbours' public safety and the environment, the management and monitoring of those selling of fireworks to ensure that fireworks sold adhere to the safety standards and in accordance with the Pyrotechnic Article Safety Regulation 2015 and the Explosion Act, that is, those purchasing fireworks must be over the age of 18. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to Councillor Emberson to respond.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your question, Councillor Megani. Firstly, I'd like to say I fully understand the impact of fireworks, having had a lot of casework this year from my own ward where fireworks have caused issues. Councillor Mangani may also recall that I had a firework put through my own letterbox 2 years ago, so I really do appreciate the impact as referred to within the question. There are a number of elements to your question, so I will address each in turn. Firstly, the council has no specific role in the education around the dangers of fireworks, but Thames Valley Police's school officer undertakes a range of education activities, of which fireworks is one of the topics that they do cover. This is an area which the police are willing to expand their education approach on if it is considered to be an area of concern. I have accordingly asked the lead member for neighbourhoods, Councillor Adele Barnett Ward, to raise this with Thames Valley Police. Regarding the regulations, private displays are to some extent limited by the Fireworks Regulations 2004, which prohibit anyone under 18 possessing fireworks and prohibit the use of fireworks at night between 11 PM and 7 AM. There are some time extensions for events held on Chinese New Year, Diwali, New Year's Eve and Bonfire Night. These regulations are enforced by the police with penalties of up to £5,000 or 6 months in prison. Outside of the regulations, there are other ways in which the council supports the use of responsible use of fireworks. For example, social media messaging from the Animal Warden and Environmental Protection team during these key dates. It is noted that the website currently has limited information in respect of responsible firework use, and officers are currently addressing this to provide the following advice. Firstly, tell neighbours, especially the elderly and those with children and pets, that you plan to have a firework display, or better still, invite your neighbours, I suppose outside of COVID, I would say. When purchasing fireworks, avoid really noisy ones. Your supplier should be able to tell you what they are selling. Make sure that pets and other animals are safely away from fireworks. Consider the timing. If you have a firework party, hold it on a Friday or Saturday and make sure the noise is over by 11 PM. For traditional celebrations like New Year's and Bonfires Night, avoid continuing noise into the early hours. Also avoid letting off fireworks in unsuitable weather when it is still misty, in strong winds or when air quality is poor. Let off your fireworks in an open garden area as noise bounces off buildings and smoke and pollution builds up in enclosed spaces. If a neighbour complains that you're disturbing them, their pets or livestock, be considerate. And after your display, clear up firework fallout and dispose of it safely. Trading standards license premises storing and selling fireworks, and an inspection is conducted on the premises, and officers have detailed knowledge around the standards of each of the brands and products. Officers work jointly with the police, and over the last 3 years, where testing purchases has been conducted for under 18 sales, there have been 1 or 2 sales per year, resulting in enforcement action. Due to the specialist nature of the sales, the actual numbers of premises selling fireworks has been reducing. To me, fireworks are clearly an issue every year, which may not only cause anxiety for pets, the elderly, the vulnerable and the environment, but can also be used in a way which may cause serious harm. I'm of the view that the regulations stipulating how fireworks are sold should be reviewed, and this would go a long way in preventing danger and misuse of fireworks. Naturally, this is something for the government to consider, and I would therefore suggest Councillor Meghani write to Alok Sharma MP in this regard. I hope this helps answer your question in terms of what the council is doing on this issue.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. Councillor Meghani, do you have a supplementary question?
I'd just like to say thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Emberson. With such an incident you have personally experienced, I will of course raise this matter with MP Alok Sharma with a request to review the way fireworks are used and maybe set up some sort of licensing which will help those people who need to be reassured that they're not going to be disturbed all the time with this kind of using these kind of things. So thank you very much for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on to Councillor question 4 then. Councillor White to myself. Over to you, Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. This one's on the council accepting a reduced offer for the Central Club. At a recent council meeting, Green councillors voted against accepting a reduced offer from the private developer Redline for the Central Club building without going back to other bidders such as Aspire, who are a community bidder for the building. 2 months since the council's decision to accept a reduced offer, can the council confirm if the new contract between Redline and the council has been signed, and if not, when is the council's deadline for getting this contract signed?
Thank you, Councillor White. The revised contract is now substantively agreed, and the aim is to achieve completion around the end of 2020. Councillor White, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Brock. Can you confirm if that's a hard deadline or if there is a hard deadline for getting the contract signed?
It's not a hard deadline, Councillor White. There wasn't a hard deadline written into the policy committee decision. Thank you for that. Takes us to the end of councillor questions. It takes us on then to item 5, decision book reports. These are for noting. I have had no indications to speak from any members, so can we agree to note this report?
Agreed.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Taking us on then to agenda item 6, which is the Q2 performance and monitoring report. I have Peter Robinson, the Interim Assistant Director of Finance, to introduce this.
Good evening, thank you, Chair. So, as you said, this covers our performance and revenue monitoring and capital to the end of September in the current financial year. The report sets in detail against each directorate what's happening in terms of against spend. It is, as you'll appreciate, very much dominated by the impact and uncertainty of the COVID pandemic, and it sets out in the report revenue pressures compared with budget just relating to COVID of just over 20 million. As at the end of September, though, we'd received pretty well £16 million from government as support, and actually subsequent to this report, which we mention here, we've also received further funding of £3.5 million from government. We haven't taken account of this in our projected spend at the end of net spend to the end of September. The reason for that is we're still uncertain what will happen over the coming months. Certainly, is there going to be another lockdown? How is that going to affect our overall income and expenditure? So this report is projecting to year end an overspend of about £0.7 million, which, given where we've been through the year, is quite remarkable, and certainly in terms of comparisons with other councils across the country, we've done very, very well to stay pretty well within budget, and we're hoping with the extra support we can actually keep it within budget overall to the end of the year. So the report, as I've said, sets out in detail for each directorate. The bulk of the impact of COVID has been in our Economic Growth and Neighbourhood Services department, impact of 15 million, which is broken down not just in terms of increased expenditure, but primarily around reductions in income, things in terms of parking, bed, and in terms of building control income as well. So moving through the report, we also talk about performance. Clearly, performance is a council has been impacted by COVID. I think what is interesting, which are sort of global measures for the council, is around people who are economically active in Reading. And I think we're pleased to report, certainly based on the Q1, that Reading is now exceeding, for economically active people, the overall performance for the South East. So 84% at the end of Q1 up to the end of June, 84% of Reading people who are economically active were employed in Reading, which is above the average for the South East region. A lot of the other performance targets are impacted by COVID, but these are set out in the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Assistant Director. I've had prior indication on this item from Councillors Emberson, Jones and Terry, so I'll go to Councillor Emberson first.
Thank you, Chair. The Interim Assistant Director for Finance has already comprehensively outlined the report, including the corporate plan measures, which I of course welcome, seeing a lot of those measurements going in the right direction. This item sets the scene for the draft budget, which is the next item in terms of tracking where we are and how we are coping in the current climate. Clearly, we're still in uncertain times with the service budgets, and whilst services have worked tirelessly to ensure a balanced budget, there are outside factors that the council can only attempt to mitigate for, and this is particularly the case for adult social care and Brighter Futures for Children, who, as outlined in the report, are meeting the budgetary provision we have within, but always face a struggle in doing so. And I'm sure Councillor Terry and Councillor Jones will speak to that when they speak on this item. I've previously spoken on these quarterly reports regarding the hard work of the council in more recent years, and I'd really like to take the opportunity to thank all the officers and all the staff across the organisation to get us in a position which I think the Assistant Director just said is remarkable really in the current time, where there are a lot of local authorities who are having to find really large savings, and others may even struggle to balance their budget. So I feel we are looking at the benefits now of such prudent financial management, and would like to add my thanks. But clearly there are still hard times ahead, and we have a lot to think about in terms of how we do balance our budget. And I would welcome further support from the government. It's been very helpful to have that mitigation in terms of the overspends we've had this year. And, you know, the income grant will be most helpful in closing the gap that we've had. Moving on to the recommended removal of the commercial property capital spend, clearly the underspend for the general fund capital programme relates primarily to this, and support the recommendation within the report to remove this. The current asset portfolio we have continues to perform and suits the needs we have for Reading and the buildings that we have in terms of making sure there's community space for residents as well in usual times. We announced a few months ago we'd be reviewing this in line with the capital programme, and we've always had modest plans in this regard anyhow. But as well as this, clearly the changes to borrowing via the Public Works Loan Board would cause complications in terms of financing any such venture. So I therefore do support the recommended action to remove this spend. So I suppose I would conclude that clearly we're in times of uncertainty with COVID-19, but we're in quite a strong position in terms of making sure we can balance that budget. But the uncertainty does make that really difficult. and the corporate plan measurements, as always, highlight the meaningfulness of our budgetary oversight. And I really welcome that our direction of travel is getting better. So I have nothing further to add at this time, Chair, and thank officers across the organisation for their hard work. But clearly we must continue to find these savings to enable a balanced budget. But I would like to note my thank you to all for striving to ensure this.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will want to speak on the draft budget later, but I do feel I need to highlight issues around adult social care. I'm afraid too often people perhaps will use the cover of COVID to mask other deficiencies. Certainly in adult social care, I want people to believe that this is not the case. And if we look at some of the tools we use for our monitoring reports, there's just a few words of caution, I suppose, I would have. I don't want to dive into the detail unless people want us to. But if you look at direct payments, apparently we're red there, we're underperforming. Well, we've currently plateaued, and as this is essentially about commissioning personal circumstances, I would argue that the current environment makes the challenge, and it's always been a challenge to move this figure up, but the challenge to move this figure up significantly over the past months has been enormous. Simply, people are reluctant to commission these services right now, so I would frame the current performance in those circumstances. Equally, where we appear to be in the green, it could also be misleading. Permanent admissions to care, for example, it could be argued that reducing that figures is a good thing. Well, it may be a good thing, but again, those figures may be distorted because there's also reluctance amongst individuals and families, perhaps to take this as a perhaps necessary step in other circumstances. So there's a world of caution around those figures as far as they relate to adult social care. However, to move, and these reports are important and they are credible. However, perhaps I could take this opportunity to say that we will be looking perhaps in a more granular, perhaps even in a more human sense at the next meeting of the Adult Social, at the ACE Committee in January, at Adult Social Care's response to delivering services against the background of COVID since last March. I think the story, frankly, has been quite incredible, the services that we've been able to deliver to some of the most needy and vulnerable people in Reading. However, though, I will have more to say about how we need to seek to fund these services, perhaps in a better and more strategic way in the next item.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Next, I had Councillor Terry.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up a couple of things as well. You'll note in the report that Brighter Futures for Children is reporting an overspend of over 2 million. Obviously, 1.5 million of that, just over, relates to COVID expenses. And similar to Councillor Jones, it should be noted that, all through the COVID this last year and the coronavirus concerns, we have still been visiting our children and checking up on them and making sure that they are staying as safe as we can possibly keep them. As you know, I find it difficult to say we can keep all children safe all the time. And in table 6.3, you'll also note that they have met their savings targets in terms of the current MTFS, a medium-term financial strategy. However, there's an underlying overspend, which is related to the cost of children coming into care. And whilst everything and great work again is being done by Brighter Futures to look to mitigate children having to come into care, once they do, it's very expensive. And looking into the next report, again, I may or may not speak next time, so I'll say some of it here. We are really concerned that COVID has caused an increase in things like domestic violence and other concerns around some complex injuries, especially to babies. And we can't be certain how that's going to feed through over the coming months and into next year, where we may see that we will have to take more children into care to keep them safe, and in which case we'll see those costs rising. So whilst it looks good so far this year and the Brighter Futures are managing their budgets well, I do need to just flag up that this may not be something that can be sustained into the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Terry. Councillor Davies.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I realise it's a wee bit late in the year to start dreaming up new projects, but I was just wondering whether we couldn't be a little more inventive about what we could do with some of that £80 million that we are not going to borrow according to the budget. I would have hoped that we could be a bit more inventive because with our announcement of a climate emergency not so long ago, we have a chance perhaps to invest in perhaps more solar panels or even tree planting. But it seems to me a wasted opportunity where we budgeted for an amount of borrowing and that we're not taking it up, and we have a number of uses where we could make a contribution towards tackling the climate emergency.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. I know you think only of expenditure and not income, but remember that the hypothecated funding for the commercial property would have brought in more income than the cost of the borrowing itself, whereas trees, very important. And I'm sure, you know, we'll continue to look very seriously. Indeed, you can see in the draft budget, the next item, our commitments to the environment remain as they have been. But investing £80 million in tree planting, I'm afraid, would be a bit of a push in the current financial circumstances, given that the trees wouldn't generate the revenue to cover their cost. Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think it's right to talk and fully reflect the compliments that previous councillors have said to officers to get this situation when other councils of all political persuasions up and down the country are facing bankruptcy. The efforts that have been made to firstly protect frontline services while having to make the savings is taking its effect. The fact is that unlike national government, we can't put up a deficit of £2 trillion. We have to balance our budget or we'll be breaking the law. So therefore, it's something we have to do. But I just want to make the point is to thank the colleagues as well for understanding the quality of outcome, because it's not about, as you rightly said, Councillor Brock, in expenditure and savings. It's also about quality of outcome of service as well. And I want to signpost colleagues and members of the public, if they're able, to page 13 of the report, which talked about the pressures of housing neighbourhood services to the tune of 1.022 million overspend. And this is pressure which is reducing to increased demand on bed and breakfast, including hotel beds, given the need to accommodate homeless individuals during the pandemic. There was a massive effort in Reading, and I'd like to hope that all councillors of all political persuasions not to forget this, not to wait to put questions in next month. They can if they want, of course, every single right to do that, but to remember tonight and reflect on the situation that this council ensured that every single individual that did not have a home of their own, a place to be called a safe place, were accommodated if they wanted it. There are a number of individuals who refused, but everybody that wanted a place was given a place. Some, in fact, stayed in some hotels to make sure that they weren't out on the streets and at risk of homelessness and coronavirus. And many, as we know, has been reported, have gone on to find private sector accommodation. That is a overspend that we are proud of. Whilst government money was given, welcome that is, it was only a small amount. It was only a small amount, as with the budget of many of the grants given to councils by government. It's not enough to cover what the situation was. and the bulk of the work and the bulk of the money, the finances to pay to ensure that nobody was on the streets was our own council taxpayers' money, which we ensured was important. So that's the first point. The second one is also on performance, and despite that huge pressure, which won't go away, by the way, when evictions are coming and further problems, national problems are coming down the line, as we know. Despite that, page 20, we still reported naught of numbers of families in bed and breakfast, while single peoples are being accommodated in bed and breakfast and accommodated in hotel accommodation and whatever. There are no families accommodated in bed and breakfast. It's remained naught, a deliberate indicator to ensure that we must, as much as possible, never resort to having to put families in bed and breakfast, and particularly away from Reading. So I've just thought, I didn't expect an opposition councillor to raise them. That's fair enough. That's to be expected. That's fine. But to raise them issues that our housing colleagues have worked so hard to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Very important work indeed. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. Focusing on the recommended action, Green councillors support stopping buying commercial properties. We have always been concerned about the large sums of money that have been spent in this area, where we've sometimes questioned the expertise that the council's been able to bring to bear. So we support the recommended actions. Thank you.
Okay, no other indications to speak. Mr. Robinson, anything you wanted to say in summary or in response?
Thank you, Chair. So I think we've had quite a few points raised. So yeah, happy to move on.
Thank you. Okay, then I'll take us to the roll call vote in alphabetical order. Councillor Davies.
Against.
Councillor Emberson.
For.
Councillor Ennis.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Page.
For, and my apologies for being late, Chair.
That's quite all right. Councillor Skeets, if you've managed to join us.
Chair, thank you. And I should be voting for.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Terry.
For.
Councillor White.
For.
Thank you, councillors. I'm for, so the recommendations are passed. Taking us on to item 7, the 2021 to 22 draft budget and the MTFS 21-22 to 23, rather to 23-24. I have Peter Robinson again to introduce this.
Thank you. Yeah, so a longer report this time, very detailed. This sets out our draft budget and our medium-term financial strategy from next year, 21-22, all the way up to 23-24. I'd like to emphasise, due to uncertainty at the moment, this is an interim position. It's in that way because we're still a little bit uncertain on certain aspects of the one-year spending review that had only just been announced when just a few days before we published the papers, and we still are awaiting our funding settlement, which is anticipated this week, most probably either Wednesday or Thursday, but we're not 100% certain. That will mean we can firm up on some figures. As we've set out in the report, we're still awaiting the numbers in terms of the business plan for Brighter Futures for children. So when we produce the final budget for council in February, the report will change. There'll be a lot of the detail in the report still, but we'll have firmed up in terms of our financial settlement. We'll be clearer in terms of what that means in terms of the spending review, and also we'll have more figures in there in terms of Brighter Futures and a lot more detail in from them as well. And certainly we'll have updated some of the areas in terms of the capital programme and the impact of the capital programme around our borrowing requirements. Just before sort of going through, I'd like to highlight that despite all the hard work over the summer, we do have a gap for 21-22 of £5 million that we will need to fill before we produce the papers and go to council in February. And in terms of the medium-term financial strategy, that has reduced slightly over the period. That's something to do with some of the one-off items in the budget that are necessary for next year, but the ongoing impact is 4 million. I did say around there's some decisions to be taken by members over the next few months. This report, or the content of it, will go out for public consultation tomorrow. One of the items which for members and the public to consider is the further opportunity to increase council tax. Our assumption had been in these papers that we could increase council tax by 1.99%, but we could also raise a further adult social care precept of another 1%. Government have given us additional flexibility on the adult social care precept to increase that by up to 3%. And later on in the report, we do mention the impact of that. So if we raise the full amount and went for a 3% increase in the adult social care precept rather than the 1% we've assumed in our numbers here, that would reduce our budget gap by £2 million next year, and that would also have an ongoing impact as well. So we've set that out in the report as an option. The other thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the high level of efficiency savings and increased income. They're set out in detail in the appendices by department and in terms of the particular actions, but 27 million is a huge figure for Reading and this council over the next 3 years in comparison to its net revenue budget for next year, proportionately, because that's on top of the 30-something million that has already been delivered over the last few years. So the net budget for the council in terms of funding next year is 138 million, and you'll see, looking at the budget in detail, some of the items are fixed and uncontrollable, so things like capital financing in terms of amounts we've borrowed already. So it's a huge figure. We spent a lot of work. There are business cases behind the figures which we'll be looking to refine, and the detail of that will be going in future reports. So the other thing I'd like to mention is the ongoing capital investment. We've talked previously in the other report about the removal of the commercial property line in the budget, but we've still got capital investment over the medium-term financial strategy of £178 million in terms of investment in Reading. Okay, so as I've said, public consultation will be on the website from tomorrow. That will close on the 15th of January. The final report on the budget will be going to policy committee in February, the 15th of February, but the papers will be published for that meeting on the 5th of February. As I said, there's a lot of detail in this report, but happy to take any member questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Director. I mean, it goes without saying, this has been an incredibly tough year in which to work to set a budget, and my gratitude to officers throughout the council for the work they've put into it. I think in some ways it's been an especially tough year because of the uncertainty, and there's still work to be done, as has been pointed out, and we continue to await the local government finance settlement, which obviously is a very important component of understanding how everything fits together. And it's right, I think, in that context that we have a public consultation on the budget, something that we brought back in last year and was very popular, received a very high response rate actually for any consultation, especially for a consultation held over the festive period. So I hope that residents will engage just as much this year as they did last year. I'm really pleased with where we've got to so far. I mean, we've managed to protect services for residents. Some changes perhaps to the way that some services may be delivered, but no change in terms of the actual service level for residents. In fact, improvements in some respects. And all of our key commitments, flagship commitments, leisure centres, investment in roads and that physical infrastructure, retain their secure capital funding. Indeed, it's a budget that continues to invest in Reading, and now, of course, has to invest in the economic recovery of the town as well. As has been pointed out, the council tax level is still to be decided, especially that adult social care precept element. Important that we understand the effect of the local government finance settlement so that we can see what we can put in place around a council tax support scheme to protect the most vulnerable in our town. But as has already been pointed out elsewhere tonight, and I'm sure Councillor Jones will have more to say, there is a particular pressure within adult social care that we need to be cognizant of when setting the budget. And the government, having long promised this reform to the system, still haven't brought forward the goods. And indeed, the need for a real long-term financial settlement from government is more pressing now than it has ever been. And we can't rebuild on hollow promises from central government and speculation as to what they may be offering. So it's time for this government to really get itself in gear and recognise that local authorities, not just this council, but councils up and down the country, many of which are struggling far more so than we are. I mean, we've built a platform of financial stability here that allows us the ability to protect services, to protect those things that we wish to invest in. But there are councils across this country that really don't have that relative luxury and are facing incredibly difficult decisions about service delivery in the years to come. We're fortunate in Reading, but we need that platform of stability so that we can move forward and invest in our town in the way that we would want to. I've indications from a few members. Firstly, I will go to Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, you used the word uncertain a few moments ago, and that's what I would like to start. There is no doubt that the funding of adult social care services in England is unfair to individuals, unfair to families, and unfair to councils. In fact, we've heard in the last Tory manifesto before the last election that nobody should be forced to sell their home to pay for care. That situation hasn't changed. That's still the challenge facing many. You also made reference to the long promised but yet to be delivered green paper on the future funding of adult social care. First promised as long ago as 2017, then multiple delays in 2018. Then Matt Hancock, who is the Minister for Social Care as well as Health, something I feel he often sadly forgets. Then promised that it would be delivered by April 2019, long before the interruption of COVID or the attention needed to attend to those matters. Yet still nothing from Hancock, nothing from the ministry. But all the while this vague promise, and yet people having to think about funding arrangements, whether they be individuals or families or councils, all the while, and plan for the future, all the while, in the absence of anything concrete. In fact, worse than that, and I do say it's worse than that, and members of this council has heard me quote this before, but it's still the case and it's still annoying. When Boris Johnson became Prime Minister in July 2019, he stood on the steps of Downing Street and said, "We will fix the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan that we have prepared." He had something. Now, echoes of an oven-reven deal for Brexit may be, but he stood on the steps and made that promise. He was going to solve it once and for all with a plan that had already been prepared, and nothing since. Nothing since. So we stagger from year to year as a council, and families face the same kind of challenges, perhaps made all the more real to all those who've sadly now lost relatives through COVID, the dilemma of residential care, knowing what should be prioritised, knowing what could be afforded. It's a terrible situation to be in, and it's no good others saying, well, the government have given another 300 million or whatever. These figures mean nothing. They mean very little to Reading in terms of whatever share that might be. And the King's Fund has highlighted the paucity of that level of funding. Chair, it's a problem that we have to face. It's a problem that we have to meet every day. And yet we wait and we wait and we wait. Well, we can't be kept waiting any longer. In the absence of the Prime Minister's clear plan, I think we are forced, and I will argue with you and with anyone else and with our finance officers, that when the government appears to give us money for adult social care with the precept, this additional council tax that we're allowed to raise, they're not giving us any money. In fact, they're rather slyly passing the responsibility and the burden, and I'd also say perhaps the blame, onto councils to try and collect that money rather than find a fair way of funding adult social care. And in fact, if we don't take any additional monies that are available to us, I believe we could be criticised by all kinds of quarters, and probably even have local MPs, or one of them, criticise us and say, well, we gave you the opportunity to raise all this extra cash and you failed to take it. So in some ways, for me, Chair, when we come to setting the budget, it's a no-brainer. I will be arguing, as you know, very fiercely that we have to take that money, and yet we've heard that it doesn't really raise a great deal. But we can't wait any longer, in those terms, to have a longer strategic plan for adult social care. So you will be aware, Chair, that as well as pressing for consideration and trying to persuade people to support perhaps that extra money on the council tax, we have to show that we're going to do some good with it. And now I believe our record is good in terms of our balancing the budget in adult social care over the last couple of years. But I'm hoping that by the time we next meet in this policy committee, that we will be able to bring forward a review of our current assets and perhaps a transformative plan to modernise our services in adult social care. That's where we're starting from. Clearly there's more detail to be added. But I'm afraid, Chair, it upsets me and it annoys me, and it probably makes me more angry than is good for me to listen to the Prime Minister make, I can only conclude now, dishonest promises on the steps of Downing Street, and to be waiting for Matt Hancock to make up his mind about whether we should even have a consultation paper, a green paper. We can't wait any longer. We must solve adult social care. And if that means we have to get on with it in Reading before the government decides what its position is, then so be it.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I mean, you almost hope that it was a dishonest promise, because otherwise they presumably just lost the plan that they had said they already had created. But you capture perfectly, of course, the problem that this government always wants to present local government with. A government incapable of delivering anything is perfectly willing to present a Hobson's choice each and every year to local councils in terms of the council tax level, and it is not sustainable, and it does not deliver what really we all need to be getting on and delivering for residents. Next, I had Councillor White, actually.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, well, through you, Chair, well said, Councillor Jones. Adult social care does need some real funding from the government. As others have said, it has been a totally unprecedented year, creating massive challenges for residents and the council in trying to set the budget. Green councillors support consulting on the budget, which is the recommended action. However, I'm not sure that people will be able to have a meaningful say without the detail that explains the cuts and the savings and the efficiencies to budgets. For example, one of the budget lines has the description, and sorry to pick on this one, but it was the first one that came to hand. Strengthening Directorate of Adult Care and Health Services decision making and supporting practice, which sounds great. No one can disagree with that. But when you see that it's saving over £1 million, people are probably quite interested on exactly what's going on behind the scenes, and so but people won't be able to work that out without the detailed business case document, which I understand that the council isn't planning to publish. It's also disappointing that the council doesn't have the detailed information from Brighter Futures, the company that runs children's services, especially as the council is expecting it to deliver £5.6 million of savings. I'm not sure how residents can have a say on this without some more detail. So I think the council needs to tidy up and publish the business cases document at the same time as it starts the consultation. And I also think that the council needs to publish something from Brighter Futures, giving residents an idea of what's happening and where the savings are coming from. Otherwise, the consultation is going to be meaningless, I fear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor White. I think it's important to establish what we are consulting on. We're consulting on the principles underpinning the budget. Are we talking about savings in the right places? Are we talking about investment in the right places? We're not talking about the granular detail within each and every budget line. And of course, as this is still a budget in draft, some of that is still to be worked through. But that granular detail and the challenge around that is the job for me and the job for you and the job for the opposition and the job for the administration. It's something, what we want from the public is an understanding of where are we at. Are there things that you perhaps feel that we have missed or neglected that we can then look to address in the final budget? Indeed, an exercise that was tremendously successful on the same basis last year and allowed us to think about how we would incorporate some additional support, for example, for community groups throughout our town in response to comments received. So I have absolutely no doubt that the consultation this year and residents will be able to engage with us and help us to improve the budget as we move forward into February. Councillor Davies next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, two things I'd like to mention. First is reiterating and supporting previous speakers on adult social care funding. The present government disbursement of an extra £300 million is not really going to do much over 400 odd authorities. But there is another item to take into account there, and that is if we want to provide decent levels of service to a section of our population, the over 65s, who are far bigger users of adult social care. The demographics tell us that they are forecast to grow by over 50% in the next 20 years, and that's a pressure that is almost unbearable on current funding for adult social care. The other thing I'd like to mention, and it goes back to what I said previously in a previous item, we can do much more. We can do much more about climate change. And yes, if we were prepared to borrow that sort of money for purchasing commercial property, we could use a fraction of it to implement more solar panels, more insulation of older houses, and that actually does bring a benefit in terms of future income. And I think it really is something that is missing, lacking from this particular budget, because we could use some of that money either to fully fund or to act as seed money to draw in outside funders into these more environmental projects. I'm hoping that we will find that in the new year we might perhaps change our minds a little on environment projects and push them more to the fore, because I think that last year's, this recent, I'll start again, the declaration of a climate emergency earlier this year must mean something, and I think that means we need to move where we have the opportunity. And yes, we are a relatively well-off council compared to many others, but I think we should be spending more money on tackling climate change than is evident in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. You're quite right about the demographic pressures in terms of adult social care and an ageing population. It's worth noting that Reading's adult social care service users are an especially young profile by national standards, which sort of reflects, I suppose, the demographic profile of Reading being slightly younger than the national average. But just to explain that those challenges in adult social care are not just related to those who are elderly, but also those with particular needs who are perhaps younger as well. Next, I had Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, it's quite good that I've followed Councillor Davies. I want to go a bit off piste, as they say, and remind Councillor Davies when he says we need to be building more houses with, you know, with the environment and climate change in thing that we put to planning 46 plus houses of the best standards of environmental standards, so passive house standards, as they would say, and both the Green Party and Councillor Davies voted against them. So what we say and what we do need to be a bit more linked together, really. Talk the talk and then walk the walk. So I just want to remind you of that, but that's not in my original contribution, if that's okay. So I think you might need to reflect on that one, Councillor Davies. It's been an offer to get the best housing environmental, but we've got to vote for it in planning. It would help. I think it was an excellent speech by Councillor Jones about the situation that we're facing in adult social care, and it's good that cross-party, everybody so far spoken has agreed that situation. You can't fix adult social care by moving the money onto all local councils. A 1% precept on council tax doesn't fix adult social care. In fact, what it does is it's cynical, because it's playing politics with adult social care and shifting the blame and the pressure onto local authorities. That's not just a view of this council, it's a view of many Conservative councils as well. And if you're going to fix adult social care, you need to have a proper project, a proper policy going forward, and it needs to be consulted on. So totally agree with that. You know, and this needs to be made clear in the consultation. It needs to be made clear in that you know, the precept is really bumping up the council tax to pay for adult social care, rather than actually having a policy in place and a strategy going forward. Talking about strategies, this is what the attempt in Reading Borough is, page 102 and page 147 as well, on the HRA capital spend. You can see that the capital spend in the HRA, it's on page 102, it's 20.1 to 20.4. 20.2, the council's made provision to further invest 35.2 million in new build council homes. Again, often opposed by other parties, but we'll get over that. We'll get over that over the next 3 years, providing additional proper, affordable new homes, subject to approvals, of course. The council also plans to invest in 30.7 million in its existing housing stock over the next 3 years, includes 27.6 million pounds of major repairs and a £3.1 million programme of fire safety works. A particular focus on the high-rise residential accommodation, which is in need of that investment. Timely, we need it now, but we're going to get it over the next period, and it's timely need as well. The fact is that it is the council tenants' money. I'd like to thank them for their patience and efforts in supporting new build to ensure that families can enjoy proper, affordable, long-term secure housing, but also that we need to invest in them as well. I want to thank the council rent, you know, tenants in their rent, and we will show that we actually want to invest in them as much as new build. 20.4, which goes on to adult social care, developing adult social care. What we as a council we can't mitigate national government's lack of planning and strategy, but what we are doing is we're investing 32.3 million to develop adult social care assets that are being appropriated into the HRA to deliver joint adults and housing needs, and also which is also outlined on page 147. We're appropriating into the HRA land and areas to ensure that we have a proper strategy, which will be coming up soon, to develop some sheltered housing or supported housing in adult social care, which will benefit many people, as Councillor Davies rightly said, who are getting older. It's interesting that every year people get older. That you didn't know, I bet you didn't know that. But it's important that this is a serious issue, and that we will be doing that, and we're spending a lot of capital to ensure that is a success and that people are benefiting living in Reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ennis. Not everybody gets older every year. Councillor Page hasn't aged a year in the past 5 decades, I think, like Peter Pan. But Councillor Davies, you asked for a right of reply, so I'll give it to you now if you wish. Councillor Davies? Councillor Davies, if you're there, you're still muted. Otherwise, I'm going to move on.
Sorry, I had a problem with my PC here. Thank you very much for waiting for me. Yes, I'd just like to come back to Councillor Ennis, who is insisting on making insinuations against Green and Liberal Democrat councillors for voting against one of his housing solutions in Coley Park. The fact is, we voted against taking away 60% of the open space around the Coley Park flats. And if he'd have come up with a smaller solution of slightly reduced proportions, we would have supported it wholeheartedly. I wish you'd remember that occasionally.
Be careful referring to the regal we in terms of planning committee, Councillor Davies. I think it's only you that sits on it. Then we have Councillor Emberson next.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Jones has spoken eloquently regarding the adult social care precept, and I support much of what colleagues have already said this evening. I suppose as part of the 183 pages presented as part of this report, I just wanted to make a reference specifically to the customer service excellence strategy, which members will have seen is looking for more investment in terms of ensuring improved access and satisfaction for our residents. To me, it's more than a strategy, it's a promise to our customers. And I think at the current time with COVID, with a lot of things moving online and services being delivered in different ways, I think it's really important to highlight that this evening. And thanks to all those that have delivered services in those different ways. And I think Councillor Brock, you alluded earlier to, or explicitly said rather, the improved delivery of some of our services. And I think this strategy will help to further improve that. I think as well, it's worth mentioning it produces considerable savings, and it is a real investment to the council over the next 4 years. And I just wanted to note that. I also wanted to just come in regarding Councillor Davies' points regarding the tree planting, or that was what you referred to previously in the other agenda item. Councillor Brock, you referred to it as a bit of a push, and I think it is irresponsible in the current climate, so I would go further. When we have a gap presented to us tonight of £5 million that we still need to find before we get to the budget in the new year, it's really important that we consider the budget in its entirety. And I'm surprised that of those 183 pages, Councillor Davies was still referring to this £80 million capital spend that was agreed to be removed. Clearly, there is a lot of work to be done regarding the climate, which he rightly points out, but this council has made considerable investment to the climate emergency that we declared. And of course, the HRA budget accounts for a lot of the housing stock in terms of putting in insulation and solar panels, etc. And I just wanted to refer to that because clearly that's a separate budget, and therefore the 80 million wouldn't clearly be transferable immediately. But I just think it's really important that we're responsible in terms of the budget. And I think it's really important that everyone considers the position we're in. And whilst I spoke earlier about the good position we are in relative to other authorities, we have to be really serious about the struggle we are going to have in the next few years and indeed this year. So I just wanted to come back to Councillor Davies on that, but otherwise, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. Councillor Skeets.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, first of all, may I just thank Peter Robinson, who very kindly gave us our group a briefing on this. I very much appreciated it and I'm very grateful to him. Also, I mean, this is a very weighty budget report, draft budget report, and obviously it's got a lot of detail within it. Now, can I just say that our normal practice on the Conservatives is not to go through this and give our political position tonight. We shall wait for the budget meeting in February, where we will join in the political commentary that's been spoken about this evening. So no doubt we will come back with some kind of response to that in the February meeting. However, can I just say that we will be abstaining on this tonight for the very reasons I've just said. We will be making our decision in February, as this is a draft budget report and our interim position. And also, we just to say that we agree this going out to consultation, very much so, but as I said, we do not agree the budget at this stage because we want to go into it in more detail at full council in February. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Skeets, and acknowledged, and I'll wait very pensively 2 months for your report to some of the points that have been made then. I have no other indications to speak. I will go back then to the Assistant Director for anything he wants to sum up. Just one thing I wanted to flag, because I think it's important. I mean, we've spoken about the challenge of this budget, and we've spoken about, or I've spoken about the platform of financial stability that we've now achieved as a council, and some of my colleagues have as well. Just point out in paragraph 10.2 refers to the delivery of £23.6 million of savings. I think it should read £33.6 million of savings. Truly monumental effort that this council has got through to get to where we are now, and a much more stable position that we're in compared to where we have been. But back to Mr. Robinson for anything you wanted to respond to. No, nothing to add, Chair. That's nice and easy then. In which case I'll move on to the roll call vote. In alphabetical order, Councillor Davies. Abstain. Councillor Emberson.
For.
Councillor Ennis. For. Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Page.
For.
Councillor Skeets.
Abstain.
Councillor Stevens.
Abstain.
Councillor Terry.
For. Councillor White.
Against.
And I am for, which means they're passed. If only Councillor White had abstained, I could have said unanimously, but only for a technical quirk. Anyway, moving us on, and I look forward and encourage residents to engage with the consultation when it goes live. Moving on then to item 8, which is the Local Government Boundary Commission review of ward boundaries, a report thereon. I have Chris Brooks to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. This report relates to the final recommendations of the Local Government Boundary Commission review, which has taken place on the Reading ward boundaries, which was published on the 29th of September 2020. The changes in that final recommendations have flowed from the draft recommendations that were actually consulted upon. And those draft recommendations were materially based on the warding proposals that the council had put forward, which is gratifying. The actual changes that have taken place between the draft recommendations and the final recommendations are modest. It involves a name change of the ward which had been put forward as the Heights ward. That has now been changed to Caversham Heights. And then there are two changes to warding patterns. One is between Thames and Caversham Ward, and that's an area of central Caversham to the southwest of that Caversham Ward. And the other change, which is not material, relates to North Court Avenue, which is the boundary between Church and Redlands Ward. Councillors will note from the report that we were expecting the draft order, which takes forward the final recommendations, in January of next year. However, the draft recommendations were published approximately 8 days ago, and councillors on policy committee have been provided with the draft order. The draft order sits in the Houses of Commons and the House of Lords for 40 days, and thereafter the order will be made. I refer councillors to the recommendations. The recommendations are to note this report, and they're also, the second recommendation is to authorise the returning officer, presently myself, to take all necessary action to implement the new electoral arrangements in May of 2022, which will include reviewing the polling district boundaries and polling places. And just the clear implication from implementing these final recommendations is that there will be all-out elections in 2022, May 2022, and councillors will note from the report that the elections thereafter will be on the basis that, notwithstanding it's all-out elections in 2022, some councillors who actually vote the lowest numbers will actually be up for election the following year. Thereafter, there will be elections the second year after all elections, followed by the fallow year. That concludes my introduction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks, and thank you for the work that yourself and indeed other officers have put into our submission to the Boundary Commission. I think we've come to a good outcome here. Councillor Stevens, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, very similar sentiment. I think the whole process was very well managed, and obviously credit to Chris Brooks. Thank you for leading us through it. I thought it was all very rational and sensible. We understood the reason for it, the pressure on the relative different pressures on demographics in terms of the growth pressures of certain wards, and so the outcome, it almost sort of answered itself. Not necessarily helpful to us perhaps north of the river, but I think it's a perfectly understandable outcome. Just one comment, the new ward, the new Thames ward straddling the Thames, again, that could have been contentious, but I think it's quite well thought through, and I think it could be quite an attractive idea of people living north and south of the river being combined in one ward. So very happy support. I appreciate already noting it. I think it's well managed, very consultative. I thought the Boundary Commission and the Commission themselves listened to us, and the outcome I think is good.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. No other indications. Mr. Brooks, anything you wanted to come back on?
No further comment, Chair.
Thank you. In which case, because there is an affirmative action in 2.2 beyond noting, I think for consistency, we'll have a quick roll call vote. So, Councillor Davies.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Emberson.
For.
Councillor Ennis.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Page.
For.
Councillor Skeets.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Terry.
For.
And Councillor White.
For.
Thank you, councillors. I'm for, so passed unanimously. Taking us on to item 9, the corporate debt recovery policy. I have Sam Wills to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. So whilst we've had a corporate debt recovery policy for a number of years, it's an appropriate time that we review this policy, ensuring it's fit for purpose and meets best practice. The policy and appendices is a compilation of all recovery policies and has been written in conjunction with all the relevant departments. There are already sound debt recovery procedures in place within revenues and benefits, housing, parking and financial services. This policy provides an overarching framework and covers the collection of rents, council tax, business rates, business improvement districts, housing benefit overpayments, sundry debts and penalty charge notices. Our collection and debt recovery policy should be fair to everyone. It's recognised that people do not pay their debts for a variety of reasons. Some people may deliberately set out to delay or not make payments, and all methods of enforcement will be used to secure payment in these cases. But some people, because of living in or on the margins of poverty, may have difficulty in paying, and we will best endeavour to help such people and to minimise the impact of debt on them. Debt is particularly topical and high profile in the current economic climate. We need to ensure that all services take a consistent approach with the aim of delivering measurable service improvement whilst considering the circumstances of the debtor. The key aims of the policy are to ensure that we maximise collection, we deploy appropriate recovery methods dependent on the circumstances of the debtor, we facilitate a coordinated approach for those that have multiple debts, we foster good financial management and control across the council, we ensure income is managed in accordance with the Constitution, financial rules and this policy, and we provide visibility of performance and total indebtedness through regular reporting. The policy aims to ensure a fair and consistent approach to debt recovery while supporting the most vulnerable and protecting the financial stability of the council. And whilst adoption of the revised policy does not currently present resource implications, failure to adhere to a debt recovery strategy could result in the inability to plan finances effectively in a difficult economic climate. Its implementation aims to deliver measurable service improvement and adherence to recognised good practice. Services and key staff will be trained in the policy's aims and specific procedures. Standard operating practices to share intelligence about our customers' debt will be established, so the principles of the debt policy are delivered upon. Learning and best practice will be sought from those authorities with top quartile performance, with an aim to achieving this ourselves. And regular refresher training will be provided, and annual reporting of position. This policy dovetails both our customer service excellence strategy and our commitment to the Citizen Advice Protocol, and looks to build on a single view of our customers to ensure best outcomes are achieved for both the authority and the customer. It provides residents with the assurance that we recognise that some individuals and commercial organisations can have problems paying, and that we aim to provide assistance to help them meet these obligations. So I'm seeking your approval of the revised corporate debt recovery policy and recommended actions, and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wills. From where I'm sitting, very, very welcome. And as you rightly pointed out at the end of your introduction, there builds on lots of other good work that yourself and your team have been driving forward recently. I had prior indication from Councillor Emberson, so Councillor Emberson.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report too, and hope that the committee welcome and support the recommended action this evening. The last policy, as the Revenue and Benefits Manager indicated, was implemented in 2014, so it's right to review and refresh this to make sure that we have a holistic approach towards debt recovery across the council. I feel like the policy strikes the council's overarching intention to ensure the maximisation of income and has that corporate mindset, whilst also pursuing a compassionate approach for the residents that are struggling in the town to pay the council in relation to whatever it might be. I think the Revenue and Benefits team strike this balance every day with their collection processes. Within the Q2 report, which was presented earlier, on page 24, members will have noted the lesser reduction of our council tax collection in comparison to neighbouring boroughs. And I think this is a real credit to the Revenue and Benefits team, who approach customers who are struggling and come to arrangements with them to make sure they can pay it, and therefore are being corporately minded to make sure that we do collect our council tax, business rates, etc., which is absolutely essential for the financial stability of this council, but also make sure that they're able to get the support they need. And I suppose on that point as well, I'd like to thank the partnership organisations that work with us in relation to debt, and they help residents across the town who are struggling and liaise with us in terms of policies like this and make sure that we are striking that balance. So I'd just like to thank the Revenue and Benefits team and also the Revenue and Benefits Manager tonight for all their efforts, and I hope members can support the recommended action.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. I think it tells you something very impressive when you know, an area, borough, with all of the challenges that Reading has, can deliver such good rates of collection, and it tells you something very good and positive about the way that the Revenues and Benefits team goes about its work. So thank you to all that. to speak, so I'll take us to, well, actually, I should say, Ms. Wills, anything you wanted to come back on?
Nothing, thank you.
Yeah, I'll take us to the vote on the recommended action then by roll call. Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Emberson. Well, we'll come back to Councillor Emberson. Councillor Ennis.
Yeah, for. Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Page.
For.
Councillor Skeets.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Terry.
For.
Councillor White.
For.
And Councillor Emberson, your last chance to vote.
Obviously for. I think I've got bad network. Thank you.
All right. I'm for, so passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Taking us on then to item 10, social value policy, and I have Kate Grafer to present.
Thank you, Chair. The Council has for a number of years been mindful of the opportunity to achieve more from its procurement and contracts, especially where such contracts can provide wider social and community benefits. The approach for this to date has been on a project-by-project basis, with recent examples being the leisure procurement, which had a number of social value items on local employment and other elements, and also the ICT future operating model contracts, which we've recently let. One of the examples from hosting, for example, being places on the Faster Futures programme, which is especially aimed at those from deprived backgrounds and enabling them to build skills from employability. The intention of this report and the associated policy appendix is to provide a framework for all officers across the Council and to set out an approach to ensure that social value is considered in all procurement and contract activity, as well as provide clarity to officers, suppliers and the public on how social value will be measured and delivered. The approach and policy is based on the National Themes, Outcomes and Measures, or TOMS framework, which provides a structure the Council can make immediate use of. The TOMS framework covers key areas in which value can be attained, including skills and employment, sustainable growth, environment and carbon reduction, and supporting resilient and communities, not least through stronger relationships with the voluntary and community sector. The framework itself provides the flexibility required when seeking social value, which, it should be noted, has to be relevant and proportionate to the contract which is being let, or of which it's the subject. The draft policy proposed does, however, highlight key areas which we want to focus on from a Reading perspective to provide best value and best impact for our local residents, including local skills and employment, picking up some of the points which have come up earlier in the meeting around tackling the climate emergency, and also covering digital inclusion, which has come up as a key priority area, not least through the COVID pandemic. If agreed, officers will not only look to embed the policy through training with other officers and as part of the hub and spoke procurement model, but also look to provide social value delivery reporting on an annual basis to policy committee, not least so that we can help ensure that the areas of social value which we're looking to pursue through our procurement and contract activity remain relevant for Reading. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assistant Director. I had prior indication from Councillor Emberson, and then I'll take Councillor Stevens. So, Councillor Emberson.
Chair, I don't have much to add. I think the Assistant Director has already provided a comprehensive outset of the report. I obviously really welcome it, and it's something the Council has already been doing, and the Assistant Director utilised the IT contract as an example in terms of liaison with schools. I welcome the use of the national TOMS. They are conveniently in line with our corporate plan, so it enables that Reading perspective to be put to the social value aspect in our contracts and procurement. I also welcome the annual updates, and I think it's really important that we track the key social value delivery and outcomes at the Council, and I hope other members support this item too.
Thank you, Councillor Emberson. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose by the whole group actually support the spirit of this, and I have no issue with what you're trying to achieve. It makes good sense. I suppose my only reservation, and perhaps we might just explore this a bit, is the sense that if we start expecting suppliers to add these additional social benefits of requirements, that the risk, I suppose, could be we start to distort a market, or that suppliers are not entirely sure what it is they have to do to win bids. And my fear might be you could distort contracts, you could dissuade suppliers from actually even bidding because they don't understand it, or they think it's not fair, and so we don't necessarily get best value for the local authority. Now, I'm sure there are ways that obviously you manage that, and I would say that probably I would want to say support it, but monitor it carefully. And if we start to see that either the costs increase, and I think some of the report said actually it tends to be the opposite effect, they can be reduced. But if we start to see some significant suppliers withdrawing from the market because they just simply think it's too complicated or the expectation too high, then I think we should be revisiting, or at least monitoring and modifying as we go, to make sure we get not only sort of the things that we want, but also best value. We've got the right contractors actually competing to provide the services for us at best value.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. I think it's worth saying that social value is not always about adding something into contracts, but about assessing something that's there anyway, and something that perhaps we've not always assessed on a formal footing, and this policy provides a way of us doing it. I mean, as you'll know from your J.R. Hicks, The Economics of Social Value, any kind of spending, any public procurement will deliver social value, but we need to assess, what delivers the best social value and the optimum return for Reading, as opposed to delivering that social value perhaps somewhere else. So lovely though it is to deliver social value in Swindon, I'd rather our contracts deliver it in Reading. But I shouldn't prefigure what the Assistant Director may like to say in response. So if I go back to Ms. Grafer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think, Councillor Stevens, that is one of the reasons why the social value, not only from a legal perspective, but also from a best value perspective, needs to be relevant and proportionate to the contract. Exactly as Councillor Brock has outlined, especially when you look at things such as local employment. Actually, part of what can be a barrier for some suppliers may be as much about knowing how to access local recruitment fairs or hold local recruitment fairs. We have Reading UK CIC that can help us with that. We can put suppliers in touch. So actually that's a relatively easy win on both sides. The supplier gets an opportunity to access a market that it may not actually have that ready communication with. And equally, by looking forward at the procurement plans that we have on an upcoming basis, I'm certainly planning on having conversations with Reading UK CIC, which potentially link to skills development as well, so we can actually help our workforce be in a better position to get employment on contracts and jobs within the council, as well as more widely. I think exactly as also as Councillor Brock has outlined, certainly what we're not seeking to do is prescribe what people offer as social value. A lot of companies will have their own corporate social responsibility or other termed initiatives, and we're looking very much to fit in with that, but very much focusing on the local delivery aspect, exactly as it has been laid out. And in some instances, certainly conversation amongst officers has been, for example, in a contract which may be about decorating some of our housing and community buildings, an opportunity for, say, a voluntary sector organisation to get a couple of free days having some of their facilities actually decorated and brought up to scratch. Might be exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for. It can be keeping it simple and keeping it relevant.
Thank you. I think entirely right. Obviously, it's to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. There isn't one homogenous concept of social value. It's a spectrum or a plethora of things, and needs to be assessed on the merits of the case before us. And good, of course, that we'll have regular reporting back to this committee, so that Councillor Stevens and others will be reassured that the policy is working well in practice and not hiding costs, for example. Anyway, I shall take us to the vote on the recommended action by roll call. Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Emberson.
For.
Councillor Ennis.
For.
Councillor Jones.
4.
Councillor Page.
4.
Councillor Skeets.
4.
Councillor Stevens.
4.
Councillor Terry.
4.
Councillor White.
4.
And I am 4, so passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Takes us on then to item 11, the Brighter Futures for Children Contracts Performance Report. Again, Kate Grayford to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my introduction for this one will probably be suitably brief. This report comes to Policy Committee in its capacity as sole member for Brighter Futures. Policy members will no doubt be familiar with the fact that we agreed that Children's Services would be transferred to Brighter Futures with effect from the 1st of December 2018. As part of being a sole member for Brighter Futures, there are 2 reports which Policy Committee members see on an annual basis. One is the Brighter Futures business plan. I know that was referred to, linked to some of the budget papers. It's not the only content of the business plan. That is to track to come to the 9th of March Policy Committee. The budget detail is being worked up separately, and there has been further detail presented in the last few hours to officers. The other report that we receive is this report, which is the retrospective performance report, which really focuses on the financial report that comes from auditors. So it's very much looking at the company's performance from a financial perspective, where it comes out financially in terms of any deficit profit going into reserves, and whether it's still considered a going concern, all of which are laid out. There's been a small addition in terms of the net deficit to the company throughout the last year, which was the first full year of Brighter Futures operation. But the auditors have no concerns, no recommendations, and I'm sure there will be other members that would want to highlight the performance of the company during that particular time, not least in relation to moving out of inadequate to requires improvements from a performance perspective. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assistant Director. Now, ordinarily, I'd look in the participants list to see whether the Director of Children's Services or the Chair of Brighter Futures are here this evening, but every time I look in the participants list, Teams crashes, so I can't. But if the Chair or the DCS are here and would like to say something in introduction, please unmute yourself and crack on. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Well, let's assume not then, and I'll move on and sort of say, I think it's been a very positive year for Brighter Futures, and the Assistant Director has already mentioned the Ofsted improvement, incredibly welcome and testament to the hard work that was going on across Brighter Futures to deliver that kind of improvement. And I'm hopeful and confident that the structure of improvement has been laid down in an effective manner, and that the Ofsted result is not an aberration, but it's something that can be built upon as we move forward. And it's also very encouraging to see planning in train for all sorts of things that will deliver better for children across the borough, more SEN school places, for example, but also that work of early intervention, which is so important to keeping families together when perhaps in the past there may have been a much more disruptive form of intervention in people's lives. Councillor Terry, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't sure whether someone from Brighter Futures would be here, but as they're not, as you're acting as the sort of shareholder, although I am as well, I think I should speak up a little bit in favour of them. I mean, it has been an interesting 2 years. It's just been their second birthday as they celebrated, although, as you rightly point out, Assistant Director, that the first year really they operated under a council budget. This is the first year they operated under their own budget, and have, you know, delivered the savings that they've required to deliver. But as I've said before, there is an underlying issue about the cost of children going into care, which isn't just about making it's about the right decision to take children into care when we need to. But there is a difficult marketplace out there. The cost of children going into care can be, very high. So we're pleased to see that there are some discussions about looking at the possibility of having some provision locally, somewhat into the future, just as we are seeing with actually special education needs provision coming forward. There have been some, improvements. We've noted Ofsted, the independent fostering agency that had to be set up under the new arrangements, has also just had a recent Ofsted report that will be reported to ACE committee in due course, which again has been very positive. And there have been other initiatives, for example, there's a community adolescent support team that has prevented a number of children from coming into care, just as the pre-birth group and also the reunification team that's been working very hard. So we can see some positive outcomes. We know there's more to be done. I think it should be acknowledged that the frontline workers have been working, really hard. And I do believe that the morale in the organisation is good. And positive, but people are feeling very tired about the pressures of COVID. So I hope that they all manage to have some kind of break over the holiday period coming up. But I hope that committee will support this report. Councillor Brock, I think you're on mute.
Well, it's my fault. So thank you, Councillor Terry. No other indications to speak. Assistant Director, anything you wanted to come back on?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Fantastic. Since it's a report for noting, I think we can seek general assent rather than have to go through the roll call. So can we agree to note this report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Excellent. Thank you very much, councillors. And that takes us to the end of the public part of the meeting. So I now need to move the motion to exclude the press and public for the final item. Pursuant to Section 100A of the Local Government Act 72 as amended, members of the press and public be excluded during consideration of the following items on the agenda, as it is likely that there would be a disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1, 2 and 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of that Act. So can I ask members of the press and public to leave the meeting, committee services to end the broadcast, and thank you for watching at home.